Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about Neferata and the vampire counts in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. What you're seeing here is a mod, Neferata's Ambition mod, which is available on the workshop. I might do a video talking about what the mod contains, what it has on offer. Though I'm pretty sure that if Creative Assembly were to do Neferata, they would not make her look like this. They would probably make her look more like she does in the thumbnail of this video, because that is official Game Workshop art for the end times version of Neferata. There's all kinds of versions, but that's probably the latest one, and they'd probably use that. Regardless, in their blog post where Creative Assembly announced they're delaying Tides of Torment, they did mention they're considering, at the very least, doing single Legendary Lord DLCs going forward, so we don't have to wait so many months. We could get the character. The price would probably be the same, though I think it wouldn't make sense if they would add it as part of a package, even if they release only parts of that package one at a time. I think that would work. Like, you have a DLC, but they're just delivering that in parts, and you can get the discount if you're looking to buy that entire package. That's my perspective on the subject. But they didn't reference a she, and that they have a good idea of which character they'd want to use. They reference a she. They also mention blood. Add 1+1 together, you get Neferata. On top of that, even if they hadn't referenced blood, which obviously stands for the vampire counts, I still think Neferata would be the most sensible choice for them to go with, because there's very few female characters in the Warhammer Fantasy universe that are left for Creative Assembly to do. I mean, there's Cathayan Dragons, one or two of them, for instance. There's a couple of others, sure. But given what we already have and what's also going to come in Tides of Torment, and I imagine that the mask is going to be part of that, I think it stands to reason for Creative Assembly to do Neferata. It would also kind of finish the Tomb Kings, because you already have Khalida in the game. The rivalry between Khalida and Neferata, well, that and other more complicated aspects of that relationship, and I do mean relationship, would be very fitting within the context of Warhammer 3. I would certainly like a kind of story focused. I think Khalida could also benefit from them doing a Neferata DLC if they added some story content, extra story content for Khalida in Immortal Empires because of that rivalry. But that's just my personal perspective on that subject. We also already have the framework for how Creative Assembly could do Neferata in Warhammer 3 to an extent. Because we have the Silver Pinnacle, and we've had the Silver Pinnacle being a provincial capital for a faction only controlling one territory ever since Creative Assembly added Forge of the Cast Dwarfs. And this one faction, again, this is a mod, but this one faction starts at war with the Greenskins. Over here, the Dripping Fangs. This screams campaign start position, and it has screamed campaign start position ever since it was added into the game. Now, for the record, if they do add Neferata, I don't think she would look like this. Rather, I think she would look more like she does in the thumbnail of this video, because that's actually official Games Workshop art, I believe, for the end times, where she joined Nagash. Now, we've had various leaks about Neferata for a while now, though the earlier leaks indicated that she was going to be released alongside Nagash. Fair enough. I guess that has changed, assuming that it was even viable to begin with. But it's always worth pointing out the leaks. Companies do change their plans. And there's also something called, ordered leak, or not necessarily an ordered leak. There's a term for it, I just forget it right now. But a deliberate leak by a company, an authorized leak, yeah, that's what I was looking for. An authorized leak by a company to gauge community interest or public interest on a subject or another. Not all leaks are just truth sayers trying to get the story out. It's also companies looking to see how people would react to X, Y, and Z on the subject. Governments do this as well with authorized leaks. So it's not just like, oh, there's a whistleblower. No, Sometimes it's companies, it's governments deliberately releasing information out there in an unofficial way to determine public interest on a subject. So I think Neferata would be a great fit. I think adding her in the Darklands would make this area more interesting, because right now you do kind of have a bit of a problem in the Darklands. Well, more than one. Maybe the distances between settlements are too great right now. Like, that's kind of one of the issues with the Darklands. Some distances can be too great, but the real problem, as I see it with Darklands, you have legendary lords, like you have Drazif, Emmerich, and Tretch over here in the south. You have Astragoth in the north, and obviously Grimgor to the east. But then you have this middle section that just has minor factions. It's only 2 minor factions, well, 3 minor factions if you're considering the Lamian Sisterhood right now. So they could easily fit 1 or even 2 legendary lords in this entire area. That's my personal perspective for kind of like the central Darklands. It would also be a bit of an interesting campaign to deal with, because already with Vlad and Isabella, if you're playing a campaign as Vlad or Isabella,
Yes.
one of the best strategies to go for in a Vlad and Isabella campaign, certainly the harder version of it, but one of the things you can do in a Vlad and Isabella campaign is actually just walk through the mountains, vassalizing Ungrim and Forgrim along the way. Yes, you can do that for diplomacy. And then just marching and taking Zarnagrund as a high-tier settlement. The reason it's very good to do so is because vampires benefit quite a bit in multiple ways from having higher tier settlements. And that's the reason we gotta talk about what the vampire counts could use in terms of a rework. Well, one of the things I believe that they need in terms of a rework, I'll disable the mod so I can talk about structures, research, etc. But one of the things that they need in terms of a rework is unique legendary lord mechanics, because there are none. All of the vampire counts, legendary lords, be it Kemmler, Gorst, Manfred, Vlad, Isabella, have the same mechanics, as in they have no unique mechanics. The only unique quote-unquote mechanic is Manfred not having a legendary lord skill line, just having 2 schools of magic on top of that, which, yeah, it's pretty crap. But Manfred instead gets the Books of Nagash, which I should add as a system just completely sucks. But that's the only kind of uniqueness that the vampire count legendary lords have. I mean, there's unique faction effects, sure, but not unique mechanics, not really, on that subject. And I think that would be really good to add. Also, by the way, if we're going to get a vampire counts DLC, could we at one point get the Red Duke as a playable legendary lord? Like, you know, take the opportunity, do a Neferata DLC, right, pay DLC, and then do a free rework for the vampire counts at the same time, and add the Red Duke as a free legendary lord. I mean, he's just screaming to be a free legendary lord. Would certainly make things a lot more interesting. Could also be an opportunity to update the bloody terrain into Bretonnia, because Bretonnia does suck right now in Immortal Empires. But that's just kind of my perspective. Just something I want to mention, though, with regards to the Immortal Empires map. I think Old World is maybe a bit too much, too big, but certainly the way it's... But right now, the way Immortal Empires is, it's too small, too squeezed together, too many things too close to each other. There should be some middle ground, I think, between the enormity of Old World and the squished together nature of Immortal Empires. Maybe that's just an idea for the future, but don't get me wrong. If they did an entire map update of Immortal Empires, just created more distance or added more settlements, just, you know, made Bretonnia and Empire, etc., all of that bigger, not necessarily more distance between settlements, because that creates a lot of issues, but just made areas bigger in general. We know the engine can support it. We know that for a fact. That can support it. Might cause some performance issues on the intern button, but that's you know, that's its own discussion at a separate time. But let's talk about the Empire counts as a race and why they could use a rework. They're a very good race. Let's be very clear. They work, and this is something I can't say about, say, Slaanesh or Norska or any of that. They do work. You will not have a miserable time playing the Vampire counts, but they could use an update. Now, the problem that the vampire counts have, the biggest issue, is that although their campaign mechanics work, vassalization, diplomacy, economy, unit recruitment for the raised dead mechanic, giving you access to a lot of really good units at certain stages of a campaign that almost no one else could dream of, the big problem is how you use those units in battles. Vampire counts auto-resolve just sucks. It's a problem because a lot of the vampire counts units have low armor. Sure, you do have units like Blood Knights and Graveguard that do have a good level of armor, but many other things, especially things that you can afford early on in a campaign with your economy or even later on when you're talking about scalability, don't have those good stats. You look at zombies, you look at skeletons, they're going to do very poorly on auto-resolve. Now, this is something Creative Assembly has mentioned that they're going to work on to improve the auto-resolve. But here's the thing. Skaven also have a bad auto-resolve situation, but Skaven are really fun to use in actual manual battles. The vampire counts aren't, because they're a bunch of units that are treated as disposable in a game where disposability of units doesn't work out. You will lose battles as the vampire counts if you just take your army and advance against the enemy, because your units will start to disintegrate, they won't rout, they'll disintegrate, you'll lose the entire unit, you won't get it back more often than not in the aftermath of the battle, even though we do have a mechanic to allow us to do so through vampire corruption, but more often than not you won't get them after battle. But once your units start disintegrating, that's going to affect the balance of power in a heavy way, and you may lose battles that you can win. So what you realize very quickly when you're playing the vampire counts is that the best way to win battles, even battles against overwhelming odds, is to just basically have your army standing around, just in the background. If you have to use your army, that's not a great situation, and you use your lords and heroes to get the job done. They can win battles, but just playing battle after battle, where the best way of winning battles is to just play around with your heroes and lords, is not fun. It's boring, it's tedious, it takes a long time, it lengthens battles. It works, it is the best way to play a Vampire Counts campaign, but it is very boring. Also, even if you're using your army, you have a purely melee army. Yes, there are some range units you can get, you can use allied recruitment because of vassalization, but primarily, you have melee units. Purely melee units. You don't have great ability of breaking down walls. You don't have great ability of breaking down gates. You have a really bad siege situation, so it's the combination of factors on that. I think the way Creative Assembly could do things better is if they changed the whole disintegration aspect, and also this applies to demons as well, so that units don't necessarily disintegrate as easily in a battle, or it's not as impactful. And then in an aftermath of a battle, assuming we win it, we can get our units back. Even if they're very low HP, there's a few models, we at least don't lose the units in a battle. Maybe dependent on how well we've done in a battle, we get our units fully replenished, or we can replenish quickly enough, maybe for a cost. I would take that, as opposed to just like, oh, getting more piles for the raised dead mechanic. That's my perspective on the subject. It's also annoying to deal with AI vampire counts because they do cheat on this subject. So they get a lot of raised dead or the dead rise again. I think that making the dead rise again or demon reforging a chance-based system in a game where you kind of want certainty is not a really great system to begin with. Maybe you can have a percent of how much your units replenish after a battle, not necessarily dependent on vampire corruption, but some things. But I think it would just work very well if we had the guarantee that, okay, I throw my disposable cheap units in a battle, but I'm still going to have in a campaign, assuming I win. If I lose, obviously I should lose everything. That's my view. Make that difference, because I want to actually be able to use my army in a proper Vampire Counts campaign without feeling like I'm screwing myself over. And that's my problem. So the army situation is a problem, the lack of variety. We need wall breaker units. We need ways to deal with the siege, to deal with wall towers, etc. inside their actual roster. We don't really have that in a situation. Another problem to talk about with regards to units is how the roster in itself feels very limiting in terms of actual recruitment for quite a while. Now, again, you have Raised Dead, but if we look at the actual unit roster, we could certainly use a DLC for more units, and we could also use different tier requirements and different recruitment buildings for different units. Because yes, you can get Graveguard at tier 3, though really, when you look at things like Armor Consulars, maybe they should just be a tier 2 unit. But yeah, it is annoying with some of these things. Especially though, it's more annoying with heroes. So we look at the Vampire Count's hero recruitment. With the exception of Necromancers, which can increase their hero capacity by 1 at tier 2 through the growth building, and you can also recruit them from the Forbidden Library for whatever reason. But with the exception of Necromancers, heroes are either, you either get the White King at tier 2 and you increase capacity at tier 4, you get Banshee at tier 3, you get Vampires at tier 4, increase capacity at tier 4. It's not the worst hero recruitment in the game, it's not Lizardman, but it does feel very, very limited. When you do get a lot of heroes, you're steamrolling the map. But unless you're playing a specific Vampire Counts campaign, so like Vlad, Kemmler, to a degree, they do have a lot of heroes they can get. Unless you're playing one of those campaigns, you'll feel very limited in terms of how many heroes you can recruit in a campaign when it matters. It's tying together in the larger issue of pacing. Economically, you do have a pretty good situation, though I do find that some of the buildings feel pretty pointless. You know, the corruption building, I understand why it's there. Sure, fair enough, makes sense, but still. But we could really use like a tier 2 economic building as opposed to just having one at tier 1 and then one at tier 3. Just a personal perspective on that. Not the most important thing, but would be nice to have. So yeah, just building updates, recruitment tiers, hero capacity, etc. When you can gain heroes and when you can increase the capacity for those heroes. One of the reasons Vlad and Isabella are so great is because they can get a lot of freaking vampires early on, especially if you're playing as Isabella. I think that should be changed. On top of that, we also got to talk about the research. It's functional, but it's not particularly exciting. You do get the Lamian Book of Blood for a Blood Kiss. You do get various other benefits like diplomatic relations with all factions, all kinds of other things, but it's just not really exciting. A lot of things just feel very fluff. I mean, there's a lot of zombie benefits. Don't get me wrong on that one. There's certainly a lot of zombie benefits, and you can make a lot of powerful stuff happen with zombies, but just a lot of this is not very exciting to be investing into. Maybe zombies and skeletal warriors should just be horde armies or attached armies to your main army, so we get rid of the vampire counts having 6 freaking stacks when played by the AI, and they should have other units. They should have Great Guard, they should have bats, they should have wolves, etc. And skeletal warriors and zombies should just follow them around. Just a perspective on the subject. On that subject. Then we have the Blood Kisses. The Blood Kiss system, the Bloodline system, pretty decent, but again, just certain issues with it. First off, it's how you gain Blood Kisses. You either eliminate faction leaders in battle, you either vassalize factions, or you assassinate characters. Yeah, it's not especially fun to just be playing around with assassination for no other reason than just to get a resource in your campaign. That's not really exciting. I mean, hero actions in general are not really worth it in Total War in a lot of different ways. That's perhaps a bigger discussion, but just either they're completely broken or they're irrelevant. That's kind of the problem with hero actions in virtually every Total War. As for the Bloodlines themselves, you do gain unique lords that are immortal from the moment you recruit them, but again, just not necessarily the most exciting system because you look at this situation. The number of blood kisses you need is increases very, very quickly. So that's not particularly great because you're never going to be able to unlock all of this in a campaign. so limited choices as opposed to real choices. And then some things are just flat out better than others. If you're playing any Vampire Counts campaign, getting access to the Lami and Dark Arts is extremely powerful, because you get 30 diplomatic relations with human factions, which, given the status of virtually every Vampire Counts campaign, it is a huge benefit, and you get the 20% character experience. Even if you don't care about the diplomatic relations, and you should, you still get all of that. Everything else, like, ooh, I can get some research rate, that's fun. Sure, Winds of Magic and upkeep, powerful, but you gotta spend a lot of blood kisses compared to, say, just getting blood dragons who have a skill line that reduces upkeep of Graveguard, and blood dragons or blood knights. Yeah, that's not as good. Also, 100 experience per turn for all armies is ridiculously good. So, yeah, Von Karsteins don't really matter. Strigoi are completely pointless. That's the issue. Like, some things, like basically these two over here, if they didn't exist, you might say, oh, you get some crossbowmen and handgunners. It's not worth losing 100 experience per turn. And besides, if you want range units, use allied recruitment. You have a good amount of possibilities in diplomacy, though maybe that should be improved. But yeah, Blood Dragons, Lamians, and to some extent Necharchs are far better than the Von Karsteins and Strigoi. Just some balance issues, some design issues, the way you gain blood kisses, the way you're spending blood kisses. But those are the kind of things I think Creative Assembly should address. And just basically in summary, uniqueness to Legendary Lords, auto-resolve situation, replenishment situation with units, or rather disintegration changes, research changes, building changes, hero capacity situation. They would make the Vampire Counts a lot better, from my perspective. Maybe we could have a system where they're all competing for power and influence, because they do in the lore. And maybe that could be reflected. Not necessarily a conclave-like system for the Chaos Dwarves, because, yeah, pacing issues with regards to that. But something perhaps inspired by it could work pretty well for the Vampire Counts. That's all I had to say. Quistine signing out. Also, yeah, just final note, climate could be improved. Always could be improved. Just worth saying that. Stay tuned for more.